What's up? Welcome back to the channel. This is Giants Amongst Us, where we share in that unique human experience and where you're going to hear real stories told by real people just like yourself. If this is your first time stumbling across the channel, know that this is an extension of a podcast that's already available. You can find it on Spotify, Deezer, whichever streaming platform you like to plug into, it'll be right there. Along with the website where you can follow up and listen to past guests, past stories. You can listen to these stories that are shared on the channel in their entirety, unfiltered. All the links, all that good stuff will be filled into the description box so you can check it out for yourself. And you can just let these stories ride in the background. Fill in some time as you do whatever it is you're doing around the house, brewing your coffee in the morning. These are stories that come from different places. They come from different walks of life. They come from places of failure, fear, struggles, pain, but they're also a testament to no matter the situation, no matter the circumstances, change can be had. If we're not happy with the results, we can change the input. Though there's 1,000 things that are out of our control, what's a few things that we do have control over? Our thoughts, our emotions, our behaviors, our expectations. So we can use the past as valuable experiences to learn from. And right now, in the present, look for opportunities to create change and start making decisions to go after our goals, to strive for something better, to create new experiences. You with me? Now let's bring it back to what we have going on today. I wanted to share another story from an ex-Jehovah's Witness member. Imagine losing everything, everyone, all the support that you once had, gone, because the difference in belief. Children being taken away, grandkids being cut off. These are tragic family separations happening all the time. And in the world of Jehovah's Witness, they call it shunning. This is something that affected Scott in a real way. And he talks about it and shares some of that with us. His entire family, 17 members on his father's side, all of them excommunicated themselves from him. Scott left the church 15 years ago. For 13 of those 15 years, he hasn't had any contact with any of his family members. What made him leave the church and eventually just go to the other side of the world, in Vietnam? Scott talks about that. And it was also in Vietnam where things got a little interesting for him. Because something changed. He went from trying to escape his story to becoming an activist. Since 2016, he's been part of a project, the Witness Underground documentary. He also has the podcast under the same name, the Witness Underground Podcast. You're going to hear about some of that as well. So without further ado, this is another Giant Amongst Us. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Scott and his story.
And my parents, when I was pretty young, got involved with a religious group that are pretty fundamentalist and extreme in a number of ways. So I was raised around it, but it sort of like had a dual perspective. My mom wasn't really good at it. My dad wasn't that good at it. My mom didn't really like it. So we kind of had a balance. And we had all of our family that were in the town were not part of it. So all of our cousins and the friends we made at school, it's not normal to make friends at school in that religion, but we were allowed to, and it was encouraged actually. So I have a pretty fond, positive memory of my weird dual childhood of being like a cult member in everyone else's eyes while also maintaining friendships from Wiccans and Catholics and Lutherans and Pentecostals and atheists. Like I had a little bit of everything in my life, and that was nice. A little variety where most people that go through this have a very strict, walled off life where they only get to interact with people from the same religion. I had a pretty good balance. My congregation is standard, but we had a guy who hired a hitman to kill his wife, who went to prison. We had a pedophile who everyone knew was a pedophile and went to prison for it. And I dated his daughter with my first girlfriend. He went to prison for it, but no one told my family because we were the new ones with kids and they didn't want to scare us away. So they kept it a secret for like 35 years. Like they went through the ringer, you know, like but our congregation isn't exceptional. Like that was normal stuff that happens in every congregation. Maybe not the putting a hitman, but like child sex abuse is kind of standard. Physical abuse of spouses is pretty standard. Like you can't really go to a therapist. You're discouraged from giving the religion a bad name. So if you're to tell someone like, oh, an elder raped me, or like I was raped by my father or my uncle, or like another congregation member, like that would make the religion look bad. So like you're told like you don't want to do that because this is God's true people and you're trying to live forever. And if you did that, like God will hate you and Jesus will murder you, kind of threats is their standard thing. They don't maybe put it in those terms, but like that's what they're
Fire and
implying.
brimstone.
Yeah. I mean, they're a doomsday cult. So like they're always telling you that it's the end of the world and you better be on the right side or you're going to get killed by Jesus. One of the ways to determine a high control group that you can also label as a cult is Stephen Hassan is a cult expert. He got out of the Moonies. He wrote a book that has a concept called the bite model. Jehovah's Witnesses check almost every single box on the list, apart from having like a single savior. They used to have a single savior. And then the one thing that really makes it a cult for me and why I made a movie about it, which I'm sure we'll talk about it. I made a movie called Witness Underground, but it describes in detail, it demonstrates shunning, which is the practice of being cut off from family, community, friends, lovers, even your own spouse and children, in extreme to the end of life. Like they will never talk to you again out of fear of dying by the hands of Jesus for talking to you. We demonstrate that in the movie, and there's no dignified way to leave. That happens whether you smoke a cigarette one time and you're not sorry about it enough, or if you just tell people that you've committed a thought crime. If it becomes known that you don't believe something that they require you to believe, it could be as simple as like, well, I think there's something to this whole evolution thing. Like, I think that's how nature works. That's enough for you to never be able to talk to your family again for the rest of your life. Just by saying that you don't believe what they tell you is true. Like God poofed everything into existence, to quote them. They tell everyone when they knock on their door, like, oh yeah, God will forgive you. Come join us. They go hard on the prisons and letter writing. They go there and talk to them, and they target pedophiles. And there's a lot of pedophiles coming out of prison and going into Jehovah's Witnesses, which, believe it or not, causes problems.
Oh, wow. Who would have thought?
No one else is giving them a break. So Jehovah's Witnesses thought they should bring them in for some reason. Maybe because they designed a religion that protects them. There's this term called the persecution complex. The religion wants you to think that you're being singled out. So they force you to single yourself out. And that when you go talk to your other church member community about what happened, something that was difficult for you, they're like, oh, it's a great example. I also did that. And you're like, now you're like both like a war veterans, like say like, oh yeah, we both went through this difficult thing together. Yeah. But it's fully artificial. But the whole idea is to create something similar. Like, oh, we're being oppressed. Like, you're not being oppressed. You're making a spectacle and you're creating a superiority complex in this child.
Out of, I don't know, maybe you could probably pick one of many things, but what was it about it exactly that was a turnoff, or to where you started to kind of see things from a different lens?
So there's one very specific thing. It could be a long story, but I'll just tell the topic. And it's what my film is about. Witness Underground is about shunning. And I mentioned it already, but it's one thing for them to talk about it or to hear stories of people in like a nearby congregation or a place far away with people you don't know or have a personal relationship with. Like, oh yeah, you can't talk to that person, or like they got kicked out. Like, ooh, what did they do? You know, everyone gossips about it. And sometimes they announce what the reason was, and sometimes they keep it a secret. But everyone knows because no one can keep it a secret. It's a very closed society, so like they really only know each other, and everyone talks about it. And the issue is shunning. So like my cousin did something that was against the rules, and he got kicked out of the religion. And it was like, oh, like I grew up. So I did have family in the religion, and it's like my mom's cousin's kids also joined the religion. So I grew up around them, and
Okay.
yeah, he did something, so we had to cut him off, or like we were told, oh, you're not really supposed to talk to him anymore. Well, really? Like that's hard because he's at everything.
And did you have a good relationship with them up until then?
Yeah, we were all pretty close. I mean, they were like another set of brothers. There's like four of them, and there's three of us guys. So like and there was like one for each person. Basically, my older brother had the older cousin, the next one was mine. I'm the second.
And just like that,
there's a couple more younger ones, and I had a little little brother. Yeah, just like no more talking to that guy. But then I saw an example of like he came to visit my dad, and so my dad talked to him at our house. and only him, right? He wanted to talk to my dad about something. Maybe it was family or business, but my dad spent a good, hour hanging out with him. And I was like, that's an interesting example. Here's my dad, the only person in my family who actually understands what's going on in this religion and takes it seriously. Like, we're all a bunch of kids, teenagers, to have this, him giving the example of treating someone with kindness and breaking the barrier. I thought that was interesting, but also like I felt terrible about cutting him off. But having seen that example, I had other friends later on that got cut off, that we're supposed to cut them off, and I didn't do it. Like, I wouldn't go out of my way to talk to them, but I also, if they called me, I would answer the phone. Like, you're not allowed to do that. You're not supposed to do that. And they're just like, they're reeling from losing every single person they know in their life, and they believe it. So it's not like you get kicked out and then you're like, oh, I guess I'm just like not one of them anymore. Bye. And you go make new friends. Most people that get kicked out are like, I really screwed up big time this time. Now I have to like double down. And so they're not just like isolated by the community, they're self-isolating too. They're still not going and making normal friends. They're trying to get back into the community. So they're living completely alone and completely in silence without any community or friends outside. There's like acronyms for physically and mentally, and that's an active member. We call it PME. And then PMO is physically in, mentally out. That's someone who's like woken up while still a member, and they're trying to keep their family together by pretending to be a believer. And then there's the tragic thing I just mentioned, which is like, you're physically out, but you're mentally in, where you like, you're not a part of the community, but you believe it all still. And you act accordingly, and you're totally controlled, and you're self-policing. And some people do this for years, decades even, where they still believe it's all true, and they don't develop relationships on the outside. And then when I left, I couldn't believe my family would do it, because they were such bad members. Like, they just didn't. Like, bad members is a bit negative, but basically they weren't good at it. They weren't taking it seriously. They skipped church all the time. They didn't really do the normal stuff on the bottom level. Like, there's a big hierarchy, many, many levels that you can achieve or like try to rise up in the church. And none of my family were doing any of that stuff. So when I finally was like, hey, I don't really believe any of this. And I think we were all being deceived, and like, there's some really negative things going on in this church. Like, they put up with that kind of conversation. We had real conversations about what's going on in the religion from my perspective as someone who doesn't believe it, for like 2 years. So finally, when I got out, I was actually surprised that they shunned me, but it came out of nowhere. Like, they all decided together without talking to me that they were going to delete me on all social media and never respond to me, and make a big deal if I ever contacted them that they will never talk to me again. And so I left 15 years ago. And so there's been about 13 years of a complete shut off. Like, I haven't talked to, the only time I've talked to them has been if I've gone to their house and confronted them. But I'm not going there to be like, your religion's wrong. Like, I'm like, hey, how are you? It's been a long time. They're like, I'm not allowed to talk to you because the Bible says you can't have a food or a drink with someone who doesn't believe in God. And I'm like, wow. Like, I just drove 47 hours, or like this is my 8th year living abroad. So like, in some cases I was living in Vietnam, and I'm like, I flew across the entire planet and I drove across a continent to see you. Can you like hang out with me for like at least a few minutes and like say anything about your life? Like, what's going on? How are you?
That's a strong.
And they're like, no, this is like you're like the arm of Satan. You're the Antichrist. You're not allowed to be on our property. Go away. Like, Mom, what are you talking about? Like, that's not what's happening. I didn't come here to talk about your religion. I came here to say hi to you.
The work that you've been involved with since you left the organization, can you mind sharing some of that?
Yeah. So I did like I call it the Dagobah experience, the Dagobah period of time, where I got out of the religion. I was like, I'm not talking to anyone about that past. I want to not be a cult member. And I also want to not be a former cult member, because I'm sick of being treated as a different kind of human being. I've been treated differently by every community. So I went through this period of like, I'm not telling anybody. And then I moved to Vietnam, like the farthest place away from society. And I didn't have community or family. So I was like, well, what am I doing here? Hoping that a relationship will exist someday. I could be anywhere. I might as well go to the farthest place on the planet away from all of this insanity. And I moved to a communist country that's atheist, essentially. I dove back into filmmaking when I was living over there, and I spent 5 years in Vietnam. And I was really dedicated to documentary and music work that I was doing there, filming and making music videos. And doing documentaries on things that I thought, well, things I could get paid for, but also things that were important. And I loved documentary my whole life.
Okay.
And I was like, I think I'm gaining the skills that someday soon I'll be able to tell this crazy story I went through. I have no idea how I'll do that. I've never done a big project that exposes something or a story.
So after you're not wanting anything to do with it, not wanting to talk about it, there was a time where you figured that maybe I can start putting this crazy story together and shedding some light on it.
I probably would have like just lived with that traumatic thing in my inside and never said anything about it. But something started happening living there. I dated a woman who we never talked about that topic. And then like a year after we broke up, she got in touch with me and she's like, hey, something happened. Like my mom died and I want to talk to you about it. And I was like, oh, what happened? She's like, oh, it's just like a really hard thing. And I think you'd understand. Maybe you're the only one. And I don't know why, but I wanted to talk to you. She's like, so I grew up in this weird religion. And I was like, really? We never talked about that. Which one? She's like, Jehovah's Witnesses. And I was like, you're joking. Me too. She's like, fuck you. Like, that's crazy. What? How did we never talk about that? But then like,
what are the chances of that?
Right. And at that time I was living with a bunch of people. Cause it's like a lot of co-living spaces, like 4 people in a big house. Everyone has their own room. But I was living with this woman in the house and she hurt herself on a motorcycle accident. So she was like living in the living room because there was stairs and she didn't want to climb up. So we were like hanging out a lot more than we had been. And then after like 2 months of this, like every day, like watching a movie and like chatting and whatever, having a drink, she's like sitting with her hurt leg. She's told me that her sister's coming to town and she had this like whole issue and she was worried about, like, she had a conversation with her mom and it was this whole thing from London. And I was like, what's going on? She's like, oh yeah, my mom's in this weird religion. And I was like, what's going on? What religion? She said, Jehovah's Witnesses. I was like, how is this happening? How are like everyone, there's someone in my life at all times who's an ex-Jehovah's Witness, but I also like really deeply respected them. And I was like, what's the deal with ex-witnesses and living really interesting lives and doing really, really cool things with their lives? Like on, well, at least how, from my perspective, like similar things to me, where I was like living it. I was like doing everything I loved. I was like exploring documentary and film and music. And I made a music documentary when I was there, and I was working on tons of music videos and having the time of my life in a lifestyle that I chose and I really enjoyed. And I kept meeting people that had the same background as me who are also doing stuff like that. And I was like, okay, I think I'm gonna need to lean into this because I kind of want to tell this crazy story about shunning and expose this religion for the evils of shunning and the emotional abuse that of all the different problems. That was the one that affected me. We already talked about child sex abuse. There's other major issues that are things that should be illegal or are illegal in many countries,
right?
Going on in that religion. But this one affected me in a deep way. Like I haven't talked to my family and siblings for years, including my grandparents, and there's a nephew, and I want to, all this disconnection that's so unhealthy and broken family, which we had a very healthy relationship up until that moment. And like, I love my family. So I was really missing it and wanting to talk about how dangerous and this religion is for creating that situation and perpetuating it on purpose. And I started having these incredible interviews, but I didn't really know how to tell the story. And everyone's story is so different. And everyone's story, I mean, this is also an international thing, right? So like many, many cultures represented. Where do you start? Do you start with like, well, I was born in it, or like there was a child sex abuse problem, or there was, someone in my family died and this is what happened, or like, do you go to the, like when you're trying to do an interview or like make a movie, like, is it the moment that you leave? Like, what was that moment? Is it the waking up moment? Is it, what was the final straw that broke the camel's back moment for you? Or is it the stuff that happens after? And I was far more interested in I was fascinated by people who've left and what they did with their lives
afterwards.
So that's my whole project. Is called XJW Coming Out on YouTube.
Okay.
So really dive into what happens after. So what I did find, and this is the exciting thing, is that our film follows 5 people that were in a community of like 300 to 500 kids over a period of 20 years inside the religion who are making art and music. And so it's like you get an insider's view of the religion through the eyes of artists, through their archival movies, archival music videos, and archival albums. They have like 30 produced albums that they released in the religion.
Oh, wow.
So that's like okay, what is this religion from the inside, from the eyes and ears of filmmakers and musicians in the religion, which is very unprecedented. That's not like a normal thing. It did happen in a number of countries, but not everywhere.
Are they based everywhere or specifically in the US?
This was one specific city, and like it expanded to multiple states around in my home area.
Okay.
And so I actually knew these people when I was in the religion because I had my own band in my high school, like my normal friends. And I was like, oh, there's other witnesses who are doing cool music. Like I didn't know that there was cool witnesses. I've been told by people from Europe that have no connection to this that like, oh yeah, like they had some similar experience when they were a kid that had nothing to do with this religion but something else, or someone from the Philippines who like grew up in America and he felt similar, like relating to the idea of having two different
Mm-hmm.
communities, the American standard community or whatever that is, and then the Filipino community that he grew up in as like a subculture or a co-culture in the States, and having a dual reality. It was like that was the thing that he got from the movie. Like, oh wow, I didn't really think of that connection. Or someone who's a Catholic, they're like, oh my God, this is exactly how I felt. Like, really, Catholics like the biggest Christian religion on the planet, and you felt similarly to these like this small fledgling cult group. Like, yeah, because the worldview, like the religious landscape of like what is the supernatural world like, and how real or not real that is when you're in it. It's like there are angels and demons and hellfire and heaven, and that is affecting your day all the time, just like the people in the movie. And it's like, oh, we didn't talk about any of those topics really. We talked about the doomsday end of the world and shunning, and they're like, yeah, it's the same. And I'm like, wow, okay, so people from all different walks of life are totally resonating with this. Something universally
Mm-hmm.
human is happening that we captured in this movie. The soundtrack is 2.5 hours long. The film's 80
Oh,
minutes.
wow.
Um,
Okay.
and the official CD soundtrack is 80 minutes, but like there's a lot of music and a lot of musical journey, and we take you through over a period of 20, it's like 27 years throughout the documentary, from like their youth in the religion as musicians, the concerts that they threw, the Jehovah's Witness like community music festival they had that was pulling people from multiple states. There was a connection to Chicago. Like half the people in the movie married people from the Chicago Jehovah's Witness music scene, and then like the shunning and demonstrating that. And then one thing that I've never seen in a movie before on the topic. There are movies on this topic. There are documentaries that talk about shunning, but they often focus on the religion and they focus on the trauma. But then that's it. Like there's not like a resolution.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to hit all the notes, but I wanted to hit new notes. And the new thing I wanted to hit was like, well, what happened to these people after all of that? And
Yeah.
there's this sort of like, it gets better. Like, oh, there's also another huge problem we haven't talked about at all, which is in Jehovah's Witness suicides and ex-Jehovah's Witness suicides because of the turmoil of this. So we wanted to put like because it's so heavy, we wanted to put
Yeah,
a
it
big
is.
breath of fresh air at the end of the movie that's like, what had happened to these 5 people that we just got to know in such a deep way over such a long period of time after all of that mess? And we show that in the last last chapter of the film as a sort of like we get to know what happened, what their lives are like. We see them kind of rising as musicians. Like once they get out, they made like twice as much music, and the quality of music was based on that. They had their
Mm-hmm.
10,000 hours in, to use a Malcolm Gladwell ism.
They were in the flow.
Yeah. And they were like, and they had something to say, and they had no filter anymore. They didn't have to code their language anymore. They didn't have to tiptoe around what people would think or say about their music. They're like, hey, we can say anything. This situation is fucked. Like, we're going to sing about
Yeah.
it. And they're creating their own beliefs and like exploring new belief systems and new ideas and talking and singing about that. And like, they all put out so many albums. We call them like exit trilogies. Like, there's the album you make just before you leave, the album that you make right after getting cut off from everyone you know, and the album you make as you sort of like land on the outside. And so the film sort of like at the last chapter is like, well, whoa, what did they do with music after they left? Whoa. They rise as rock stars. And so you mentioned that before, but not everyone's a rock star. We have carpenters too. And it's like, we also have rock stars. So check out the film and celebrate with them. Yeah, it's been a pleasure, Rich. I really appreciate the conversation. I think you took it on a really fun journey, and it brought out some interesting topics.
I hope you guys enjoyed the conversation. If you want to listen to this in its entirety and unfiltered, you can check the show notes in the description box. That link will be provided. And also, it's as easy as just punching in Giants Amongst Us and throwing that into the search engine. It'll pop right up. You'll find the website with past stories, with past guests, with blogs up that you can go through. And you'll also find all of the platforms that it's available on, so you can go ahead and plug into whichever one you like using. And if you found value in this, if anything that was said resonated with you, if you've had experiences in the past with Jehovah's Witness or just being involved in a certain organization and want to share your thoughts and leave some feedback, feel free to do so. Let's keep this an open conversation. Each one, teach one. So any feedback, good or bad, feel free to lay it out. It's all good with me. We're going to catch up and do this again. And before I go, if you would like to be a part of the show and share your story, or even a story of someone in your life that has impacted you in a positive way, you could always reach out to me via email. I'd be happy to connect. Until next time, and very soon, peace.
I'm looking for a sign to know I'm on the right road. Ain't seen no sign since Jericho.